All right, we're on air. So thanks everybody for coming today. And we have, I think, Commissioner Strand on the phone and Commissioner Pepcorn here. And we have our consultants here as we kick off our deep dive into parking management, both in a high level and as it applies to City of Fargo specific. There's a long history, obviously, of parking in downtown. And then first of all, for those and might be watching, my name's Nicole Crutchfield, the City of Fargo Planning Director. And today we wanted to kind of kick off a phase one, if you will, of some downtown parking analysis as we move forward. And then we do have in the audience here, the kind of previous manager of the parking, he has more history, as well as our city attorney and city administrator. So with that, I guess we'll pass it on. And then a little bit more relaxed today, I was going to say, there is a lot of content here. And so if you do have questions, feel free to ask the questions. We might hold the discussion part until after the presentation because we talk at a lot of different ranges. And we'll go from there. So I'll turn it over to Mark or Casey. Do you want to kick us off?
Thanks, Nicole. I'm Casey McNames with KLJ. I have Robert Farron here with me today from Kimley Horn, and then online we have Ian Butler-Severson with KLJ as well. So we are looking forward to kicking this off with you, and yeah, I guess are we ready to dive in? Or okay, sounds good. Well, we're going to kind of take you through a timeline here of where we are, where we're going, and where we want to be. So hang on tight. It's going to be exciting.
Before we get into some specifics around our work here in Fargo, kind of want to take a step back and talk about why we manage parking and the importance of municipal parking. And really, when we think about parking management, we think about the positive outcomes that impact aligned city goals around providing reliable parking availability, supporting economic development, improving safety, and mitigating congestion, and certainly in particular in Fargo, maximizing your existing parking investments in the ramps. When we think about the continuum of parking management, often folks think about either we price parking or we build more parking, and really it's generally a continuum, and it's based on demand. And so the recipe, if you will, for parking management is the ingredients of high parking utilization, active adjacent land uses, certainly the city's done really well with in downtown, increased density as well, more residents. As we see demand increase, we think about things like wayfinding and signage, on-street time limit restrictions that you have on street here in Fargo, and then looking at maximizing existing assets through shared parking agreements. Only then, when we see increased demand, do we look at paid parking rate adjustments, off-street, of course, in particular here, and then eventually considering new supply. But just kind of want to set, level setting in terms of why it's important to manage parking and some of the tools that we'll be talking about further in the presentation we can use to actively manage on-street and off-street municipal parking.
So the goals of our study, when we set out to do this, were really to take a look at the inventory that we have for the Central Business District and downtown Fargo, as well as how is that being utilized. And then taking a look at the city and how we deliver parking services throughout the city. What is the industry doing, and how do we better align to be more efficient and more effective in what we're doing? And then very critical to that process is we've got an expired contract right now with the parking management vendor, and we want to get that back out on the street so that we have that service in place and we can continue that moving forward. So that's a development of an RFP that we'll get into a lot of detail here today. And then finally looking at development of operating costs so that we can better manage budget as we move forward, and what kind of operation and maintenance guidelines should we be looking at as we bring all these facilities online and continue to maintain them for the foreseeable future. So where are we? what we did is we took a look at, again, that central business district, and we looked at how many parking spaces do we have, public on-street and public off-street, and how are they being utilized. So we took a snapshot in time on May 22nd of this year and looked at how that ratio was looking. On the left, you see the average utilization. So that's the average per hour utilization from the hours of 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. On the right, you see the peak utilization, which was the hour of noon, which is no surprise, I don't think, to anyone. That's a very busy time for downtown. What you'll see is in green and yellow, those are areas that we have less than 60% utilization. Anything in the yellow or the orange and the red, that is above 60% utilization. And when we look at industry standards, we really want to be 60% or above for on-street parking, and we want to be 90% and above for structured or off-street parking. So what does that mean when we dive into that a little bit further? We've got what our current inventory is. That's everything that is physically open today. That's about 49,000 or 4,900 public spaces in the downtown business district. The current demand and utilization, you can see that here. We're hovering just about 40% plus or minus for that period of time that we took a snapshot of. Gives us a surplus. What the city has done is they've done a really, really good job of investing in parking. We know that there were some hot spots in the past. We've done a really good job of trying to alleviate those. So we'll talk as we go down the presentation here, how do we use that? What does that mean for us? How can we maximize that to our benefit?
Alongside how the system's currently operating from a utilization perspective, we also looked at how the city organizes itself in the delivery of public parking services. Before I get into this, I should note, I call myself a recovering parking director, formerly in the city of Columbus, Denver, and Aurora, Colorado. I mention that because I've been on the municipal side of things from a parking management standpoint as an operator and asset owner, and now as a consultant. So kind of bring those best practices to the table, as well as some pure city review we're going to look at in a minute. When we start to look at where we want to go, we want to understand how things currently function. I'm going to roll through a couple slides here and not get into great detail, but to really show that the city, a lot of city departments have their hand in overall delivery of municipal parking, whether it's from a parking citation issuance or adjudication standpoint, how we set rates, how we manage the curb. And so the three slides here speak to that. It also speaks to the fact we've been meeting with city staff over the past several months to understand how services are currently being delivered and some of the opportunities and challenges therein. And so the other part here, whether it's the administrative functions, the operational functions, a lot goes into managing public parking. And again, a lot of different departments and divisions of the city, as well as your current third-party operator, Interstate Parking, have a hand in these various aspects of operational delivery of service. On the technology side, as with most industries, we're seeing the parking industry gravitate toward emerging and new technologies. And again, quite a few different departments have their hand in either procuring, holding contracts, or operating those parking technologies. So with that in mind, as we look ahead, we're going to talk about how do we move from a fragmented delivery of service, as you just saw with all those different departments having hands in parking, to something a little more streamlined to gain some efficiencies. On the financial side, we also looked at how the system is currently performing, and we looked at it two different ways. We first wanted to look at how does the system perform from a pure parking revenue and parking expense standpoint. Day-to-day parking revenues coming in, whether it's monthly parking, hourly parking, permits, or special events. And from an expense standpoint, the day-to-day operations of parking. And you can see here that while looking at just those inputs, there is positive net operating income that can be reinvested back into the parking program, both historically and in the future. However, as we look at the financial performance when we factor in things like debt service, your mortgage payments on the facilities, capital investments that are needed ongoing for these facilities, just like your house, parking structures need, certainly maintenance and care. And then on the revenue side, we look at assumptions around TIF revenue that's being used to offset those mortgage payments and capital expenses we start to see a bit of a different picture, still long-term looking positive, but you can note the red line there. There are several years of negative net operating income, and therefore you see some of those subsidies coming into play from TIF and other types of revenue. Of note, this is not how the city currently accounts for parking. Parking is accounted in multiple funds, not atypical for a city, but we wanted to paint a more comprehensive picture of looking at all the different inputs of a revenue and expense side to really understand the overall health of the parking program. And finally, where we are today, the city has been opportunistic in working with certainly the private sector in fulfilling economic development outcomes through public-private partnerships. And so part of our work was to essentially audit the current public-private partnerships at ROCO, Mercantile, and the soon-to-be-open NP ramps. And we looked at the multitude of whether it's parking agreements, lease agreements, et cetera, that go into making these developments happen to better understand any type of restrictions we may have in place going forward on how we manage those, certainly manage those facilities toward the RFP, making sure that we've accounted for any type of agreements in place that will have an impact on current or future operations and maintenance of these ramps.
All right, so we've talked a little bit about where we are today. Now let's look at where we're going. So we took a look at the 2050 demographic forecast that MetroCog had done recently and looked at just with a strict population growth, where does that put us with the parking surplus that we have today? How well built are we in preparation for that? And you can see here we looked at average demand, which is throughout that whole 8-hour period that we looked at, and then we looked at peak demand, which was the 1-hour time frame of noon to 1, which was a little bit higher demand portfolio. So looking at how that projects out with just, again, population growth, we're still seeing that we have a net surplus of parking. Again, that's good news, because what we look at is, as we dive into that even further, we can take a lot of those recommendations that are made in the 2023 Downtown in Focus study with the potential for redevelopment, reinvestment in downtown. There is room for growth, and that's exactly what they're saying as well, and this study just helps support that effort. So you can see here, if you take the 2018 MetroCog parking study, new recommendations or new suggestions that they have to look at parking and how that might be redistributed in the future, which I believe the Land Development Code is looking at revising as well. If you just take a straight shot of a third, you've got commercial, mixed use, residential. How does that look like in the future? We talked earlier, we had about 3,000 spots of public parking that was forecasted as a surplus. That gives us another 500,000 square feet, and this is just one estimate, one example. There's multiple different ways you can slice that. There's a lot of things that could change, but it just gives us hope that we're headed in the right direction. We've got a lot of potential here, and it's really pretty good news.
Thanks, Casey. As we start to think about how do we manage all the parking we currently have? How do we administer all the parking we currently have? I want to take a step back and talk about the different ways in which cities govern their parking from an organizational operational standpoint. And it really is on a continuum, and there really is not a one-size-fits-all approach to how parking is managed throughout the country. It's a continuum of either direct city management on the right-hand side over to indirect city management on the left-hand side. Direct city management looks like one department with a lot of city staff enforcing parking, maintaining parking, operating parking, all the way to the other side of certainly the range, where the city can contract out to a business district or a parking district, and then operationally everything is outsourced to a third-party operator. We've placed where you currently are, knowing that the commission has been decommissioned recently by the city commission, but you have historically been under a parking authority commission model, so a little more management by the city, but not direct management, and you've historically been outsourcing your operations. From a financial standpoint, we know that parking groups can reside in the general fund, a special revenue, or enterprise, and currently you're in a special revenue fund. I set this all up because we did a little bit of peer city research to look at how different cities of your size or slightly larger manage their parking, again, just to provide some context for our recommendations. So we'll take this out of the abstract And we'll look at Cedar Rapids, Sioux Falls, and Lincoln and how they currently manage their parking and some other characteristics of their parking programs. And so you can see there's a diversity, right? Again, not a one-size-fits-all approach. Cedar Rapids takes that more indirect approach through a contracted model with their business district to manage day-to-day operations, and they do that through an outsourced vendor. Sioux Falls has a consolidated department and a hybrid operation where they have some city staff hired to operate and manage parking, and then they have a third-party operator as well for certain functions. Lincoln is a consolidated department, but then outsources all of their day-to-day operations to a third-party operator. And you can also see from a financial model, there are a couple different flavors of how these funds are accounted for. A lot of time, from a fund standpoint, you can't be an enterprise fund unless you're self-sufficient. So you see a lot of parking programs either at enterprise or special revenue, which is kind of being on the journey to attain enterprise once they have revenues that exceed day-to-day operational expenses as well as debt service payments. You can see there are varying sizes of these programs, and in particular, varying efficiencies in how they deliver their services. The row on the bottom of mention, we looked at cost per space per year. What does it cost to both have the day-to-day operations, that's the OpEx only, that bottom figure, and then how much does it cost to operate parking when you include your mortgage payments and capital service expenses? And you can see, again, they are widely ranging. Fargo is one of the more efficient, although we'll see kind of later on, there's some opportunities to increase some of the services that are offered through the program that may drive that cost up. You can see Lincoln on the other side, a much larger system, much more debt service, and you can see $920 per space per year. And less than half of that is actually just for the operations day to day. So the point here is a lot of different methods and means to operate parking, with also the understanding that parking is quite expensive, but it's still a public service and a good that we want to provide to the public, both from an economic development as well as just general customer satisfaction standpoint. When we think about the recommended structure, taking into account there's a lot of different methods and means to do this, from an organizational model standpoint, we are recommending the city migrate from the parking commission, which was dissolved earlier this year, to a consolidated department model, to having the city identify a department and a staff person to be the main point of contact for parking management. From an operational standpoint, to continue to outsource management of day-to-day functions to a third-party operator through a modernized contract, and we're going to get to those RFP details here in a minute. And from a financial model standpoint, we do see an opportunity long-term, especially as we looked at that previous financial pro forma, of migrating to an enterprise fund over time, especially as your debt service payments start to be relieved and as you start to see continued increases in parking revenue. How do we get there? Part of that is to look at consolidating some functions under a third-party operator and consolidating them under, again, through this RFP process. So I went through the previous slides earlier much more quickly about the different functions. I'll spend a little more time here and talk about some functions that we feel could be appropriate for the third-party operator to also run day-to-day under a new contract. That would include things like citation adjudication when someone appeals a parking ticket, and also parking citation collections when someone decides not to pay a parking ticket, whether they appealed and that appeal was upheld, or they just decide not to pay their ticket. As well as things like banking services, providing more of a turnkey operation and letting the parking management vendor assume those responsibilities for dollars coming in and then remitting those on a monthly basis to the city. You'll note here that public entities still hold authority for things like reviewing parking ticket appeals and other requests of curb uses and ADA parking requests. From an operational standpoint, we see opportunities for the vendor to assume responsibilities of towing at the request of the Fargo Police Department, also maintaining things like EV charging stations and elevators and our ramps, while still maintaining authority for the police to, again, issue tickets and tow as well, but having that third-party operator provide some relief for Fargo Police Department to respond to other calls for service. And from a technology standpoint, we see one of the greatest opportunities to consolidate these functions with a third-party operator, whether it's holding contracts and maintaining warranties for things like a parking citation management system. In layman's terms, I get a ticket, I want to appeal or pay that ticket, I go online. That would all be housed in the third-party operator. If I want to get a permit, either on-street or off-street, to have the vendor host that service and hold those contracts. Again, banking services as well as digital payment platforms to pay for parking. Those would all be the responsibility of the parking operator. And the biggest change here is that we would recommend the parking operator hold the contracts and maintain the software and applicable hardware for these, whereas right now it's a hybrid approach between the city and the operator. And so with all of these recommendations from a consolidation standpoint, how do we get to this end goal? And so we've broken down these recommendations into 3 time periods: near term, midterm, and long term. In the near term, as was mentioned before, we are recommending the city issue a parking management RFP very soon to have a more modernized contract for your third-party operator. There are a couple code changes we're recommending you take to fulfill those RFP requirements. I'll touch on those in a minute. And then, of course, to hire the third-party contractor to manage your both ramps and lots and on-street enforcement. In the midterm, we see opportunities to consolidate your parking funds to eventually move to an enterprise fund and have some parking management enhancements I'll touch on in a minute. In long term, we see a benefit of not only the city identifying a consolidated department to be the main point of contact of parking, but also to hire a full-time parking manager as your system grows and becomes more complex. So a couple code changes that we're recommending the city entertain. One would not necessarily be a code change, but reaffirming your current code. Currently, when it comes to parking ticket fine amounts, there has been a longstanding tradition in Fargo to issue a warning ticket for first-time offenses. We believe that the city should follow your fine structure and issue a first ticket with a fine amount to promote enforcement and to promote compliance, understanding there are other methods and means to promote education and awareness beyond warning tickets. When people do receive a ticket and they wish to appeal, we're recommending that you elongate that time period and provide 10 days to appeal as opposed to 5 days, and also provide that third-party operator the authority to adjudicate those tickets per the recommendation made earlier. Finally, on the vehicle impoundment side, providing a clear direction as to how many tickets you would be delinquent on before you could be eligible to be towed and impounded. We're recommending 3 or more. That's an industry standard. And again, to allow a designated third-party contractor to tow said vehicles. So those are some, just a couple code modifications that would need to take place in order to fulfill these recommendations. Some parking management enhancements that do not need to happen initially, but would happen in tandem with the new parking operator and in partnership with that parking operator, is to look at enhancements to your time-limited zone, to expand hours and days of operation to meet new and emerging parking demands on street as the downtown vibrancy has increased, utilizing shorter time limits on street to promote turnover of those spaces and move longer-term parking to the ramps you've invested in, and to promote and expand the use of your residential parking permit system to prioritize resident parking where needed as the residential population grows. On the off-street management standpoint, we see opportunities to reduce or to either remove or reduce your first hour of free parking to make better utilization of those facilities and to also produce more robust revenue streams for those facilities as you move to enterprise program, and look at extending your paid parking into the evening and Saturdays, again, to mirror new and emerging parking demands so that we provide a predictable parking experience to the customer, whether they're parking on street or parking off street. Moving to the RFP, we're almost there. The RFP is, again, to procure a vendor to manage day-to-day operations and management of downtown Fargo parking assets and to lean into expertise in modern parking technology solutions. There are 6 main goals for this RFP. They're really reflective of the goals of the public parking program. It's about convenience for downtown parkers, supporting economic development, balancing that use of on and off-street public parking assets, increasing the awareness of the public parking system, knowing we have availability to leverage and utilize the city's already invested in, ensuring that when people do utilize these ramps and lots, they're well maintained, they're safe for our customers, and again, to support the consolidated, to make sure that people are aware of all the consolidated parking options as more residents move downtown and as more development occurs in the downtown area. In terms of the scope of services, we're recommending a 5-year term not to exceed 10 years to provide some consistency for both the operator as well as the city. The facilities that are included are your ramps and lots, as well as downtown and on-street parking management. One thing I'll highlight here is that part of the RFP response will be a line item expense budget, proposed budget, that offers transparency in how much it costs to operate parking on a day-to-day basis. And we're recommending a flat, small monthly management fee that would represent profit for the vendor. Currently, your management, your budget is a all-in-one management fee where you can't see the breakdown of expenses. We want to unravel that, but still have a management fee to reflect vendor profit. That just be a much smaller aspect of the compensation model. And so with each response, each responder will fill out a spreadsheet that is standard across all responses so the city can compare from a financial standpoint how services are proposed to be delivered. In terms of a specific scope of services, we're going to include quite a few aspects of day-to-day management, including maintenance and all the different maintenance aspects we mentioned before, operations of note, parking enforcement on and off street, as well as that citation adjudication and collections process. I'll also note program marketing to raise the awareness of the current parking that's available, security services in the facility, and we are being open-ended on technology and equipment procurement. We want the market to bring their latest and greatest wares to innovate and provide that frictionless, barrier-free customer experience for people who are paying and parking in our facilities. In terms of the timeline, we are recommending that the RFP is published in mid-October with proposals coming in just before the Thanksgiving holiday, reviewing those and hopefully having a contract negotiated and brought to the commission for recommended approval either late in December or first in January, but hopefully in December, so that the city can onboard either your incumbent through a new contract or a new vendor in the January 2026 timeframe. And so our immediate next steps here, finalize the RFP, advertise that RFP per the schedule just mentioned, award, and then contract with a new parking operator as the more immediate next steps in the process. With that, I know we went through a lot of information. Happy to entertain questions or comments from the commission or other staff members. Thank you.
And maybe I'll add real quick, the development of this study included a work group from staff. So we had representatives from all of the departments, police, public works, auditors, everybody that touches the program were involved in this study, as well as stakeholder interviews, collaboration with interstate parking, and really to get into the nuts and bolts of our system today. So while they're not here today, we were involved in those partnerships.
So I got a couple of things. First of all, that's great that because I think the departments have to be, obviously we're talking about some changes that will impact them. And so if you don't mind me asking, so is your concept then, if we add a staff position, would that be in planning, or is it going to be its own entity, or how would that possibly go?
I don't know if we've identified that exactly.
Okay.
And I think there's lots of options.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you don't mind me, I just got a few questions. So there's obviously some changes here, the 2-hour free parking to 1 hour, and just some of that. Can you just talk a little bit about that? I do think that's been and the weekends too. That's a common in the other places that you've looked at? Is that a common thing, common practice?
Parking management can vary from city to city. We are seeing a trend of more cities move away from free periods and to either discounted first hour or then escalating hourly costs. But we're seeing more cities moving away from free periods to reflect the fact that there's value to that parking, and there are costs associated with delivering the parking. When we look at things like rates and restrictions, we really want to achieve an estimated outcome of what we want to see. So from an on-street standpoint, we want really short time limits that are well enforced to spur turnover. We really want longer-term parking to go in those ramps and lots. And then if we want people to stay all day, we want to have rates that support that. And if we want to have off-street parkers park overnight, we want to see rates that, of course, support that as well. So general movement to doing away with free period, although certainly not exclusively.
Can I just talk, the rates to me were, especially those are pure cities. This was not like areas that were, to me, the differential in rates was amazing. And so obviously and I know there's a lot of other things going into it, but can I just say one thing too? To me, this is an opportunity. Obviously, our downtown has been devastated by COVID, but also to have the homeless downtown engagement center. All of our businesses have left, and so we have very little business activity right now. But this is an opportunity for us to kind of reset, and once hopefully we get all these issues resolved and businesses return, that we have a good plan in place. Does that make sense to you? To me, that's the thing that I think so.
I think creating something that's consistent and easily communicated to the businesses is of most importance. The rates you're mentioning, I think the cost per space per year, there's a lot more detail in the reports that we didn't have time to get into today. We talk about the varying rates and citation fine structures of the various cities. Parking is local, right? So as much as we can look at peers, it's really what makes the most sense for Fargo. And it's really about maximizing utilization of your on and off street. And that's some of the recommendations we made from a rate perspective are really trying to support those goals.
Well, it's great. And I really appreciate this cash flow, this chart that you showed where it's more of all the other costs are included. And so I really I think that will help us going forward because sometimes we don't look at all the other things. And so I do think we'll make it and my main thing is we want this to be productive and efficient and all those things. And so I think this has been a great, it's well worth the effort, what you've done. So thank you very much for doing that. I guess I have a question for the staff from your perspective. And I was on the parking commission but as time goes by, then you just have to make changes. To give an example, the concept was we had very short-term parking on Broadway, 15 minutes, and then as you got further away, then there was longer time. And so this is kind of changing that as well. Would you say that's true too?
We're still generally recommending shorter time limits on street. I think the one caveat and something we're going to put into the RFP is having adequate resources to enforce those time limits and ensure that we're gaining the results we want to gain, which is high turnover. Not to say that isn't happening now, but we want to create that consistent enforcement environment as well. But generally, we're recommending short time limits on street that can be enforced and enforced well, and then longer term parking moving to the ramps and lots.
And I think some of the concept too is, to your point, Commissioner, I think if you look at the last 25, 30 years, the goals of downtown the needs have changed and to have a system that is adaptive and responsive to what else is going on in the market, et cetera. And so, I remember those past parking commission conversations, right, to accommodate the needs of the Fargo Theater, where maybe is 1.5 hours, or someone who might be coming from rural and never been in a city before, and how to accommodate ease of access and wayfinding, all of those other things that provide that environment for welcoming and economic development. And I think over time, we've had a program that tries to strike a balance of all the needs. And so at some point, though, the financial picture, how that tells the story too, needs to be considered in the in the analysis, and so more deeply. And so I think that's, at the end of the day, it is about what does the community want and what do the city commissioners, to help lead that. I know if the finance director was here, she'd have a perspective that's, very clear. And so it's really about balancing all of those needs. And also, I would say, one of the things we haven't gotten in, but just to show you the level of detail we could get into, there's all sorts of things, there's been discussions with Kilbourne about, how do you accommodate residential parking if you have an apartment? Is there a different thing? Or if you're a business owner, small business owner, and you're trying to figure out permanent parking for your staff, what are those systems? And so I know Interstate already, through partnership, communications with the city, works with large employers for different reasons, or small employer needs, just like we have a contractor permit license right now, or on-street residential permit currently. So there's ways to fine-tune the details as we get into it.
Can I ask a couple questions about the governance structure? Obviously, we used to have the parking authority. I do think it's important for us as a city to still monitor how it's performing. However you recommend, can you talk a little bit of how that will happen? How do you envision that from the city commission or from the city's perspective? How will we monitor it? Because we'd have outsourced management. Would they do quarterly reports, or how does that work?
Sure. From a oversight standpoint, the recommendation is, every month, the parking operator would submit, the parking operator would submit a budget, annual budget, to be approved by the city. Then within that, every month, the city would receive a monthly packet that has all the breakdown of revenues and expenses. And it would be the responsibility of the city main point of contact, that staff person, to review those and approve those. That would all be done within your budget process, right? So the thought is the parking operator brings forth the budget. That then gets plugged into the overall parking budget, knowing that aside from the operator, you have debt service and you have capital maintenance that would be outside the contract. So that would be a part of your overall city commission approval of that budget, just like you would approve any other part of the budget. That is different than, of course, a parking authority model, which is a separate entity from the city. But migrating from a commission to a consolidated department, I don't see a significant difference in how budgets would still be approved through the normal course of business that the city has.
I guess that's the day-to-day, I guess. So is your vision then that like our finance department would be the ones monitoring that? And then basically from the city commission, we would, maybe at our finance meetings, that would be one of the things that would be on, is that how you picture it going?
Yeah, I think we would still follow, currently, like the purchase policy processes, our, liaison commissioner involvement, the finance department involvement. So all of those normal city oversights, like by audit or finance, et cetera, would still exist. And those powers and duties and authorities would still exist. And so it's really just, right now, I'm looking at Ashley, our parking manager. She bounces between 5 different department heads. She juggles things. And so it's more about how do we operationalize across departments, and where does that authority lie?
Okay, another one is, so the financial model, it's a special revenue fund. And I guess my question is, how will that work with our current financial setup? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So currently, the parking fund, or inputs for parking, revenues and expenses, are in various accounts. And so de facto, it's a special revenue fund because it's not all housed within one account. Currently, the city could, and this was our working with the finance director, who was extremely helpful. We were able to create those graphs that you spoke about earlier and paint the picture holistically of all the different sources, regardless of what account they're in. Moving to an enterprise fund would require 2 main things. One, revenue exceeding expenses. And then alongside that, taking all those different accounts and creating a new account. Not unlike other enterprise funds the city has, assuming your utility or other transit potentially tend to be enterprise funds. So the main step is for revenues to exceed expenses. And right now, when you paint the entire picture, including debt service, we're not quite there yet, but over time, given a bunch of assumptions, you would be able to move in that direction. But that would still be housed within your budget, and still be reported in a similar fashion that you would any other enterprise fund at the city.
But I would say this is a big change too, because right now there's kind of a lot of, it's in a lot, and this would be more consolidating it, wouldn't you say? And that would be a good, from my perspective, but I still think with the staff to make sure that they know what this is going to entail, because it's a big change. We've been doing it the same way for 50 years, I believe, and so I don't know how that all is going to go. And I see some smirks from some of our employees or our staff, so maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, I guess, financially it can be very confusing within our parking operation. Public Works pays for night enforcement. The planning account pays for day enforcement. The parking account pays for facility enforcement. Parking tickets goes into a different fund than the parking account, so it just cleans that up.
But, and I do think that's very important, that that it will be a lot more clear how things are, and the auditor's department handles payments of tickets, so it's like literally we have so many departments involved in this, and to make it more concise and more clear would be an improvement from the staff perspective too, wouldn't you say so? Anyway, but I just want to thank you all for doing this, because this is, it's very important, and I do think we're kind of in a lull right now, and so this is an opportunity to kind of reset the table, so I think that's great.
Yeah, I would say just like in past years too. Commissioner Strand, did you have some questions?
Yes, I do, and thank you. And Commissioner Pepcorn, I'm going to take advantage of the lull at the moment. I've been downtown, involved with downtown for over 30 years, and more than not back then, it was from the perspective of customers coming downtown and how user-friendly the system was or not, and whether or not they felt like sometimes harassed or penalized for wanting to come to what was then a rather dismal or more dismal downtown activity-wise. Now and I know Commissioner Pepcorn and others are concerned about the flow of business downtown now. It's still relative to then at somewhat of a peak, but we don't want it to diminish. So here's one of my thoughts is, how do we find that balance? Or I would hope that we can look to always have that balance, so people are welcome downtown, because they can go park at West Acres for free and other places. So we need to always find that balance between welcoming downtown, making it easy to use parking downtown, access downtown, making it affordable. Don't feel like you're chasing people down for the dollar because they came downtown. There's that balance that I think we need to always keep an eye on. And then, I have another thought after that.
Yeah, no, I think you took the words right out of my mouth. I was just going to say, I know they're not here today because Rocky literally is running a radio show at this very hour about downtown. And so, but, in partnership, we still continue to depend on that partnership and understanding about parking and its alliance with the strategies of downtown. And DCP's always been a partner, a very active partner in helping set that stage and communicate about the public's needs and the visitors' needs and their membership needs. And so it is important, especially if we think about the older days of downtown and the purpose that the city provided in setting that invitation, if you will, in coming downtown. And so absolutely, it's not just all about the monies, it's about how the whole system works together, and that we don't have a policy maybe pushing against a different policy, and then as a result, we're not making progress because we're caught in between. And so that's a little bit of what, I staffed the Parking Authority for Parking Commission for a number of years and worked under Bob Stein. Kim did too. And I know, Commissioner, you've been on the Parking Commission, and, it was, we still need that review of strategy that the Parking Commission did. What was starting to happen is we would get a little bit, caught between, there's the elected officials and their vision, and then there's, we kind of had this outside body, running its own calls and pushing its own strategy. And so we want to make sure the City Commission are fully involved in that strategy setting for the downtown. And because there's many different interests at heart and having to prioritize, which is what the Downtown in Focus plan talks about.
And thanks, Nicole. And lastly, a couple thoughts, but Over the last few years, we've built maybe 4 or more parking ramps downtown after there were people telling us parking ramps are obsolete. You will never need to build them again. And because of Uber and ride shares and changing whatever, but we have a growing, bustling downtown, and parking is an important element of that. Here's my question. Relative to our cohort cities that you compared Fargo to and to the rest of the country, most of us, when we travel somewhere, we're not surprised at all that when we park in a street, in a bus, in a part of their downtowns, that we pay a fee to park. Most of them have some sort of newfangled parking meters or old ones. Now in North Dakota, it's illegal to have a parking meter. So I'm just curious about that dynamic, if there's pros or cons to going the route of parking fees on the streets on Broadway itself or not, or what others do, or if that's a good idea not to ever have it.
Can I just add on to that? Obviously now with technology, the question is, are some of those technologies considered parking meters? It's pay parking on street. I think that's like a legal question that we would have to have our attorney make sure. But nowadays, there aren't parking meters. Now you pay with a credit card or so. Anyway, something like that is, and I think we're going to rely on you for some additional expertise, because that might be an option we should start looking at.
Commissioner Pepcorn, you read my mind. That's exactly the type of question that is going on in my head. With the new technologies, what are our options or alternatives?
It's a great question, and one we've talked to staff about since we started the study. To take a step back to one of the earlier slides, and we talk about parking management strategies. At the end of the day, we want to create an expected outcome. The expected outcome is having available parking. And so there's different tools we can use. We can use time limits that you're currently using. We can use permit programs. We can use paid parking. Traditionally, on-street parking you pay for, and off-street parking you actually would have either free completely or some kind of free period. In more maturing programs, you do away with the free period and it's just paid on-street and off-street. The state law here creates the unique situation where your on-street parking, which is your highest demand, most visible, most accessible, is not paid, and your off-street ramps and lots are. So if the state law was not in place, we would have a recommendation, or if you were starting your parking program, we would say, once you reach a certain utilization level, you move from time limits to paid parking, and you have that condition in several areas of the downtown. To answer your question about the technology, we are seeing rapid adoption of mobile payment technologies, whether they're apps, text to pay, QR codes, et cetera. In some cities, we're seeing 75, 80, 90% of transactions flowing through name your application or digital payment platform. In most, but not all cases, there's still a physical meter, whether it's a single space or a kiosk that accommodates parking payment for multiple spaces. But we are seeing cities move into an asset-light or asset-free approach, which is purely saying you can use one of many digital payment platforms to pay for parking. And so the question is, and it may be more semantics, what is the definition of a parking meter? We're often advising our clients to update the definition of a parking meter to include things like electronic devices. And so that would be probably a broader discussion about if an asset-free digital payment device would be applicable in North Dakota.
So can I make a request? Could we put go ahead, Commissioner Strang.
I'll be quick. Thank you. I'm sorry I'm not there in person. I agree. I think our legal team should look at this and visit with our state legislators. In my head, I would rather have the approach where people going downtown, et cetera, to shop proactively know that they're going to be paying for somehow or other, whatever technology, a fee to park. I'd rather have that approach than penalize them afterwards with a citation and a fine and chasing them down to make them pay a fee. So in my head, I think it's a more user-friendly, upfront way if we can get that around the state law. or work with the state law, and people may decide you never want to charge people for parking downtown. I'm just questioning the alternatives.
And so, to me, part of the RFP could be, there might be a thing where you get a permit to park on the street. And so that's, I think, to have our attorney make sure what are our options that we have. Because what I think it is, I think it's very specific, the state law, because it was back in the 50s, and it's only for parking meters. And so I think if we get more clarification, that would help us. But I do think in our RFP, what are some options for on-street parking? Do you get what I'm saying? And so anyway, if that's possible, I think that would be a good addition.
Yes, that would be a great addition. We're asking for the proposers to recommend different payment technologies, and those would be ubiquitous on and off street. We have talked about permits. We've talked about time limits that would be unpaid, but if you wanted to extend your time on street, there would be a permit. There are a lot of solutions out there that would reflect the value that on-street parking offers to businesses, while still maintaining the management outcomes we want to see, which is short-term. You know, we don't want to see paid parking and then people park all day on street, right? We still want to see the turnover. What's the best way to achieve that? And I think a new vendor, either your incumbent or a new vendor, will be able to work with the city on those type of creative solutions. Great comments.
Commissioner Strand, did you have any other questions or comments? It looks like we might be.
I don't. I look forward to looking at the visuals that you're sharing today, and I can't thank you enough. My wheels are turning with the amount of information shared and the value of it. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of information, and we'll send a link to the presentation we'll post it online and then send a link to all of our commissioners. And we'll put a hard copy on your desk, and then, and look forward to, unless there's any concerns, we'll be, as you saw on the calendar, we'll be bringing that RFP process back to City Commission here in the coming weeks, yeah. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you for having us.